Doug Armstrong and the Blues have had an active start to the week after they tendered offer sheets to two Edmonton Oilers players and completed a trade with the Pittsburgh Penguins. So what do these moves mean for the Blues for the upcoming season and beyond? Alec and I will discuss all that and more on this episode of Note News. We've got news. We've got some off-season news to talk about. Finally, thank goodness. It gets pretty slow in the NHL off-season, but we're glad to have something to talk about here. Before we do, if you're enjoying Note News so far, we really appreciate it. If you'd like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're almost to 100 subscribers, so just a little bit more, and we'll hit that triple-digit mark. So if you haven't done that already, we would really appreciate that. Rating the podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts goes a long way as well. We're also on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at Note News Pod. And if you have any friends or family that you think would enjoy Note News, share it with them. We appreciate that. Help get the word out. So we have a move. We've got stuff to talk about.
Raise the banner.
Raise the banner. Dougie Dollars comes through. he has another move, and that's my new name. A la Money Mo for John Moselak. I think Doug Armstrong. I think Dougie Dollars is a good name, so that's what I'll call him now. He has completed a couple moves. Alec, how are we feeling about him?
Pretty good. Kind of in a similar vein, I think, as to maybe what we were expecting. A little bit unexciting, but really moves on the margins that you're kind of hoping that a retooling team would make. And I don't know, compared to a lot of other teams that probably should be going through a retool and seeing like how active the Blues are, again, reminds me why we support the best team in the NHL.
That's right. So why don't we start to break down some of these moves? So they have submitted or tendered two offer sheets to a couple of players on the Edmonton Oilers. Those players are Philip Broberg and Dylan Holloway. So for those that don't know, offer sheets can be submitted to restricted free agents on other teams to acquire those players, to acquire the signing rights for those players. And so the team that they're on, so in this case, the Edmonton Oilers, has to match the offer that the Blues gave these players, which would bind the player to that contract on the Oilers for this example, or they lose the player to the Blues in this example. And if they do end up losing the player, in those moves, they would get compensated with draft picks. And offer sheets are pretty rare nowadays. We don't really see them that often. I think I saw something on J Fresh Hockey on Twitter that said there's only been like two successful offer sheets like in the cap era, which is it doesn't happen often. It doesn't work out often, but. Yeah, the Blues have tendered offer sheets to Philip Broberg and Dylan Holloway. A little bit about these players specifically. So Broberg is a left shot defenseman. He was drafted by the Oilers in 2019 at 8th overall, so a first rounder and pretty early in the first round as well. He's 23 years old right now, and the offer itself is for a 2-year contract at roughly $4.58 million per year. And that dollar figure would require the Blues to give up a second round pick. So they're like, it's the max required for a second round pick to go to the Oilers. And then with Dylan Holloway, he's a forward drafted in 2020, 14th overall as well by the Oilers. He's 22 years old. And the offer to him is for a 2-year contract at roughly $2.3 million per year. So that amount would require them to give up a third round pick to the Oilers. So what do you think about these two players, Philip Broberg and Dylan Holloway?
It is, as I said, kind of the move that you would hope a retool team could make, because if they play well, hopefully you can keep them around or trade them away for more than you paid for them. Yep. The players themselves, I think, have shown flashes of being pretty good in the past year or two. Mm-hmm. I feel like Holloway is the one that people will be more attached to, especially Oilers fans seem more attached to. He really kind of came on last year in the playoffs, scoring 5 goals. And all of them were kind of came in different fashions, scoring off rush chances, scoring on the power play, scoring just down the slot, just ripping one past the goaltender. So he's shown upside with his offensive toolkit. He clearly has upside with his speed and defensive toolkit because of it. It all hasn't come together in a like string of consistent play for him is a pretty big like mark on his prospect profile or whatever. But he's only 22, soon to be 23. He'll turn 23 this September. So by next season he'll be 23. But this is definitely a young player who's shown a lot of upside that, as I said, Oilers fans are really attached to. Broberg, on the other hand, I think is definitely the more likely of the two that the Blues will sign. I think it's pretty likely that both will honestly sign with the Blues, but we'll discuss that in a minute. Broberg is a player that I would be excited about having. I think he would slot in honestly like on the second pair, which is pretty good, especially for a 23-year-old. He's just kind of shown a very like solid defensive game, kind of, and just really been pretty consistent, I would say, throughout his career so far, both amateur and professional. There's not a ton to say. I feel like he's a little bit just like I don't know, standard like defenseman, but that's someone that, as we talked about in a couple episodes previous, the Blues could really use.
Yeah, definitely. And they could also use some youth, right? And I think, if they're able to get these two guys, that would help with that a lot, especially defensively, where, you're looking at players like Torrey Krug and Justin Falk and Colton Parayko, who's, I guess, a little bit younger than those two. And then you've got like Ryan Suter, right? So they definitely need some youth and need sort of an injection of young players, and this would really help with that. In terms of like their NHL production so far, it's pretty minimal. Broberg has only played 82 games in the NHL, and Dylan Holloway has only played 89, and I'm pretty sure that is just regular season. So maybe there's a few more to pencil in there for those two, but in terms of production in those games, for Dylan Holloway in 89 games has scored 9 goals and has 9 assists. And then for Philip Broberg in 82 games, he's got 2 goals and 11 assists. So not a ton of production offensively quite yet from either one. But we did see, I think, as you mentioned there, some flashes of potential, specifically from Holloway in the postseason run. He played in 25 of their games in the Stanley Cup playoffs this year, and in those 25 games had 5 goals and 7 points. So, you said you were watching some tape before this episode of his performance during the playoffs, and like there was some diversity in the way he was scoring and creating offense. So that could be exciting, I think.
I would say Broberg too had a nice playoff run. It just doesn't really stand out on the stat sheet, but he held his own against literally the best competition the NHL has to offer, and that's saying something at his age.
Yeah, he played in 10 of their playoff games, and as you said, maybe didn't light up the stat sheet, but I think like when you consider like the eye test, like just watching him play, I think he seemed pretty solid. I think I'm not sure how Dylan Holloway would slot in quite yet on the Blues, like on their NHL roster, because we do have a decent amount of scoring depth, as we've discussed already. He could probably take maybe a lower line spot from someone.
I'd say probably a bottom sixer.
Yeah, for sure. But I think Philip Broberg would probably slot in maybe on our second defensive pair. That top pair we're thinking is Parayko Leddy, right? And they'll keep that going, and maybe Philip Broberg, being a left shot defenseman, could slot in on that second pair. So do you agree with that? Like where do you see these two players slotting in for the Blues, and how do you think they could contribute if they were to play next season?
Yeah, I think it depends on how the Blues view them once they get to like training camps and whatnot. Especially like I think honestly it would probably be a battle between Broberg and Scott Perunovich, someone that the Blues have drafted and been trying to develop. He's also a left shot defenseman, and a year older. Um, so I think it would really come down to like who they prefer more. But honestly, I would, at least in terms of their career so far, I think I like Broberg a little bit more than Perunovich, but I would be fine with seeing either of them.
Yeah.
Um, and I think both of their games kind of complement Justin Falk's more offensive profile. I think both of them have like the ability to be two-way guys, but definitely lean more on that defensive game, which helps a lot.
Yeah, definitely does. In terms of like, what's next for these deals. So the Oilers, I believe, have a week to match the offer, or they will give up the players. So the reason this is interesting, not just because offer sheets are so rare. Another reason that it's interesting is because of the Oilers' cap situation. So I think they're about 400,000 over the cap right now, which is 88 million for next season. So they have a week to figure out how to shed $7 million in salary, in salary cap space. So that is if they want to keep both players. So their GM is Stan Bowman, recently hired, who we're a little bit familiar with, but like welcome to the job. You've got a week to figure out how to do it. So this leads me to my next question. Do you think the Oilers will try to retain these players? Do you think they'll try to retain both, one or the other, or do you think the Blues will wind up getting both of them?
I think, as I said, if they were to go, I don't think they can do both. I think that's
Mhm.
incredibly unlikely.
Yeah.
If they were to go after one, I would say Holloway is probably their target.
Mm.
Um, the other thing is this feels like it has to be the final week for like any type of excuse me, Darnell Nurse, like rumors, trades, or whatever. Like it feels like Bowman's hand is really forced to move on from Darnell Nurse, and
Yeah.
which really makes it harder for him because he would have no leverage in any negotiations, especially especially if any team wants to take on Darnell Nurse.
Yeah.
And honestly, I don't know that anyone outside of the Sharks would. But
Yeah.
if if we see Darnell Nurse moved, I do think they would make a move for one or both of these guys. But if that news doesn't come in, I really don't see it happening. I don't see it likely. That's a lot of term to move around.
Mhm.
As I said, Holloway is probably the one that they'll go after. The other thing too here that I think is significant is the term that the Blues offered them. Both of these, they offered them both 2-year contracts,
Mhm.
and next year is a really really important year for the Oilers cap situation. So because of Leon Draisaitl hitting the
Yeah.
unrestricted free agent market, and obviously, that's a player that they have to push really hard to keep, and no one
Yeah.
doubts that they will. But like signing, depth guys like this for that period, unless you try and trade them at that point, which that just seems really complicated and kind of making it harder on yourself. So because of the term and because of Darnell Nurse and just because of the Oilers cap situation a lot, like $7 million is a lot to clear out in not even considering like how much Broberg and Holloway could make.
Right.
Yeah, I truly I don't think it's likely that I think it's likely that both of these guys are going to be Blues. And I think almost definitely one of them will be.
Yeah. I think I'd agree that it's more likely that we end up with Philip Broberg rather than Dylan Holloway. I mean, you look at you know the context of the Draisaitl negotiations is huge. If they want to re-sign Leon Draisaitl, it's going to take a huge contract, and that's going to be a lot of money for him. So I think they'd be looking, to free up some space, and then the offer sheet to Broberg being at 4.58 million, compared with Holloway's 2.3 million. So like, just money wise, they would have to pay less to keep Holloway, right? So that might be the move they would want to do money wise. And then if you also look at playoff sort of usage of both of these players, that leans more towards Holloway as well, who played in every game, I believe, all 25. And then Broberg, I believe, only played 10 games for the Oilers down the stretch towards the Stanley Cup. So if you look at usage and then money-wise, I think it is more likely that they'll try to keep Holloway and the Blues end up with Philip Broberg, who, honestly, like, we can sort of debate who is the better player, but I think I would make the argument that they could use Broberg more, right? We talk about how much they need defense and how big a hole that is for the Blues. I think that, if he is able to move to a team like the Blues that isn't contending for the Stanley Cup, he can log some full-time minutes and really get some good experience and maybe develop into a really good defenseman for the Blues. So it will be interesting to see how this develops. We have a week, right, to find out what's going to happen. Hopefully the Blues get a new player or two out of this. So if they do get one or both of the players, they'll have to give up draft picks to the Oilers, right? So if they do get Philip Broberg, they're required to give up a second-round draft pick. If they get Dylan Holloway, they're required to give up a third-round draft pick. So in conjunction with this move to tender the offer sheets to these two Oilers, they've also completed a trade with the Pittsburgh Penguins, pretty much just swapping draft picks here. The Blues acquired a 2025 second-round pick and a 2026 fifth-round pick, and they sent to Pittsburgh a 2026 second rounder and a 2025 third rounder. So it's just kind of swapping picks around, preparing to send the necessary picks to Edmonton if it comes to that. You were looking at something interesting, sort of, just the outlook of the Blues in the next few drafts. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. So one of the things this offseason that's been so interesting is how much draft capital the Blues are sacrificing to make all these smaller moves on the margins. And you hope that, it can pay dividends in return, that maybe you could move some of these players away to get that back. But as it stands right now, the Blues next year, so for the 2025 draft, still have our own first round pick. We have now the Penguins' second round pick from this trade. We have our own third round pick still, and then a fifth and a sixth. So no fourth round pick, no seventh round pick, and no additional picks beyond that. If both of these moves go through, that would leave us with just our own first round pick and then our own fifth and sixth round picks. I mean, that's 3 picks on only one of them being like top 100, top 50, depending on wherever our first round pick ends up being next year. So that makes it incredibly difficult to move around in the draft, which is something that the Blues don't really like doing in the first place. But additionally, that makes the draft class so incredibly small. I will say where the Blues prospect pool is at right now, it does feel like there's a good amount of depth and quantity. So maybe getting that quality would be helpful too. Looking forward in 2026, as things stand right now, we have a first round pick, a third round pick, a fourth round pick, 2 fifths, and a sixth and a seventh. So no second round pick, but 2 fifths. Otherwise, mostly standard there. And then 2027 is untouched as of right now. So still have some from the future to pull off of, but they become less valuable in a trade if you are trading future draft picks for it. And I just think this is really interesting that you'd think a team kind of going through a retool should be trying to hold on to draft picks and develop and draft and develop some of their own talent. But I think even if we compare to what we were talking about earlier about how the Florida Panthers built their team, and as we've mentioned throughout several episodes, we're kind of hoping, and it seems the general consensus, that the Blues window is probably like 2 to 3 years away, which it's interesting that, we signed both these guys to 2-year deals, same as like Drew Bannister and all of this seems to be lining up like this is all very intentional.
Yeah.
Players that you've drafted, probably aren't going to see NHL time for 3-4 years minimum, and that's just
Mhm.
at a bare minimum. So for all the picks that we would be making next year, 2025, you probably wouldn't expect to see them until 3, 4, 5 years out, which by that point, who knows what the St. Louis Blues look like and how big or small their window is.
Mhm.
And that's why, again, getting that quality instead of quantity of prospect is what you'd be ideally trying to shoot for. So it's very interesting to me, as I said, that they're kind of sacrificing draft capital to make it through this retool period. Because yeah, it is sort of paradoxical in nature. You want them to be drafting, but also when you think about the actual window of time that all of these moves will align, it does make some sense. And the Blues certainly have a strategy. Also, some of this could be sort of recouped with the coming trade deadline, that they could be banking on that and factoring that in as part of their plan.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, it's stuff to think about, and it's definitely a new type of team building that we haven't really seen in St. Louis in quite some time. But it's something to be potentially excited about.
Yeah, for sure. I think understanding the context of people are like, we need to tank and get draft picks, but it's like the window isn't that far from opening, like you said, and you know even if we're drafting a player next year, we're not going to see him for a few years, like you said. So um, definitely interesting. Do you think with this offer sheet move, do you think that the Blues have like put like a target on their back? Like, do you think the Oilers or anyone else is going to start to target RFAs, RFAs like next season? Like, who do we have? Like Jake Neighbors, I think, is an RFA pretty soon. Joel Hofer probably as well. Do you think the Blues are running a risk here? Do you think it's a gamble?
Um, that is kind of funny. Honestly, no. I think this is just, I don't know, GMs making GM moves, and
Yeah.
also with the Blues with their cap situation, like it kind of doesn't make sense to, because if they want them, the Blues will just pay the money because we have the space for it.
Yeah.
Um, and if it does become a problem, then as I said, it kind of helps recoup our. I mean, some of like Joel Hofer and Jake Neighbors could be returning like first round picks depending on how they play, because they're going to demand quite a fair bit of money.
Hmm.
So yeah, I would say probably not. But that is a funny thing to keep an eye on.
It is funny. It seems like Oilers Nation is pretty
Yeah.
pretty upset about this.
If the Edmonton Oilers fans were all 31 other NHL GMs, then I would say yes. But
Yeah, yeah, that's fair. Yeah. So we'll have to see how this all plays out. Like we said, it'll be a week before we know um, uh, what, or it could be a week unless the Oilers figure it out sooner, but it'll be some time before we know whether or not the Blues end up getting these guys. Fingers crossed. I think it's really creative. I think it is a gamble, but then again, his name is Dougie Dollars, and he's gotta be creative. I think, like, say what you will about Doug Armstrong. I think this is like a smart move. I think it's evidence that he is, still investing in his team, still working on making it better. Call me a water holder for Doug Armstrong or whatever. But I mean, this is a very creative move, and it's very smart. And I think it could be a really good one. So we'll just have to wait and see how it pans out. If it does work out, if there is a shakeup on the Blues roster, we're going to talk about that on a future episode. So stay tuned for that. Is there anything else you want to add before we close out here?
no, I don't think so.
Cool. So, like I said, you can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Note News Pod. We sort of hinted in our previous episode that we're looking to maybe do a giveaway soon. So, follow us on social media if you want to hear more about that. We're also looking to get some guests on. It looks like that's shaping up pretty good to get some guests on Note News pretty soon here. So if you want to hear more about that, you can follow us again on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at Note News Pod. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're almost to 100. Get us there. Like this video, rate this podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, all that good stuff. And share with your friends. Like I said, if you think anyone would enjoy Note News, help spread the word. So that'll do us for this episode of Note News. We'll see you next time. And as always, of course, let's go Blues.
Let's go Blues.